Yes, Bob.
I just want to put some numbers into perspective. If you look at our forecasted 2012, which is coming up 5 months from now, revenue from our own taxes, which is Prop 2.5 plus new growth, we're in round numbers, $900,000 increase in revenue. We look at state aid, and we look at state aid as all of state aid.
Right.
Right. We're down $87,000 below last year.
Based on the governor's budget, right?
Based on the governor's budget, of course. And these are just round numbers. If you look at the health insurance increase for this fiscal year, which is around 11%, it's about $500,000. So without, and the health insurance is the biggest issue, because without some relief on the health insurance, we can project another 10 or 11% increase. You know, now we're talking another 500 going to $600,000. Take that away from the $900,000 new revenue, that's $300,000 left.
For everything else.
And by the time you get through with the rest of our fixed cost items, debt service, etc., there's nothing left as an increase to fund our school and town budgets. And that's the issue. The health insurance has got to be the #1 issue. It swamps even the cut of $87,000 in state.
Which is a great segue into our next topic item, healthcare reform. If you want to, is everyone all set with local aid in Chapter 70 at this point? We can always circle back, but we'll move on to the next topic, if that's okay?
Sure.
Fine? Okay.
Absolutely.
So do you want to talk a little bit about?
Well, I think, as I said, I think there's a number of pieces of legislation filed. You know, some of them are pretty aggressive, some maybe less so. I think probably, maybe more importantly, you know, the governor's filed something, so he's moved off of, up through this year. The only additional proposal the governor had filed was sort of they go from the 70%, you know, weighted vote to down to 50% plus one. That would really be the only incremental. He's kind of moved it and said basically, you either got to join GIC or have another a comparable plan in place, because you know joining GIC might not be the right thing for everybody, but you know getting something more in line with that. So he's done that. It's a little unclear as to how he structures it, and that's going to remain to be seen. But I mean, the speaker addressed it in his swearing in. There are a number of bills filed, Associated Industries. So I think there's a lot of impetus. And it's sort of, I mean, this is, you know, this is one of the downsides, or, you know, depending on if you, I guess you'd say downside or upside to a really bad fiscal situation, is that that's, like I said, you know, before we had hoped that, you know, hey, we'll maybe keep local aid level funded, maybe it goes up a little bit, but we still address health care. The fact is, you know, like Bob just said, you know, you're looking at some cut, varying sizes, depending on which community you're in, of local aid getting cut. So this is maybe a piece of kind of keeping it level by doing this. So it's not going to be a step forward. It's not going to be, hey, we're getting another $1 million in local aid and we're getting health care, and that's going to allow us to go, you know, go beyond core services, to add on services, to go do other things. It's more probably apt to be part of being able to try to continue to keep some level of core services without having add-ons. So hopefully there's a new chair, and I read yesterday that I think that in previous years the Committee on Municipal and Regional Government heard these bills. This time I believe they're going to the Committee on Public Service, was what I read yesterday. At least that's what I think where the governors went. You know, I have to check that. One of the challenging things is I can't give you bill numbers yet. Our bill filing is due the 21st. Sign-ons are done today, so most bills aren't even to committee yet, and there are some 5,500 pieces of legislation right now that after today will all start being dispersed off to committees, and then there'll be a lot more information. So now a lot of times you hear House docket and you'll get a number, but that may not ultimately be the bill number. So when we get the bill numbers, it'll be a lot easier to kind of say, and whether it's through Stand for Children, the Suburban Coalition, the North Shore. I mean, there's every different little group they'll coalesce around certain bills, MMA, whatever. So we'll have a better idea in a couple of weeks.
Mel?
Just this is somewhat related to the healthcare costs, and doesn't maybe affect tomorrow or next year, but one of my big concerns is we keep kicking the can down the road on unfunded liabilities on both pensions and also the healthcare liabilities for retirees. And if we don't start paying that money, somewhere, maybe even 3 or 4 years down the road, we're going to start getting hit with huge bills. And I'm just wondering if there's, I know the governor's proposed some reform for pensions. I don't think it goes far enough. But I don't think anybody's looking at the unfunded liability for health care insurance, which retirees get for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And I just think that there has to be a focus on that, because that's going to be a huge burden maybe for our kids, but I think we need to start thinking
Right, it's going to be a big
about
issue. I mean, obviously, one of the, you know, at the municipal level, you probably ultimately, when you finally get into the process, there are certain things that you probably wouldn't talk about doing in January, that by the time you get to, in the past April, but now June, in order to kind of get everything to match up finally, there's things that you finally ultimately do that, left to your own druthers, everybody knows something, hey, we don't want to do this, we don't like to do this, but this is how we finally have to get the things to match up. That's the same thing with our unfunded pension liability. We're probably going to have to put the schedule out. And even putting the schedule out 15 years, from 2025 to 2040, for the state liability, our pension, what we have to put into our pension obligation is still going to go up this year. If we don't put it out, instead of it having to go up, you know, $20 or $30 million, it's going to have to go up $400 or $500 million this year. If we don't put it out, and we say, well, we just need to address it now, that $400 or $500 million is going to have to come from some other place in the budget. And I can guarantee you that one of those places will probably ultimately have to be local aid. Not because that's what I recommend, but, you know, and sort of when I try to address these things, I try to give you maybe what my perspective is and what I'm going to do and what I'm going to support. But I also think I owe you what I think the sense of the broader legislature is, because that's what ultimately is going to determine what happens, regardless of how I ultimately vote on something, whether I vote for or against or advocate something, you know. So.
Well, and I'm not a, you know, I'm not a big, everybody's a hack, everything is corrupt, but when you but when you read stories about parking attendants at Massport making $117,000, it, you know, even a kind of a liberal guy like me starts losing faith in basically everything, because if I'm making $117,000 to sit in a booth, I don't even collect money anymore. I tell you, I point you to where to go, and I'm making $117,000. It's like you throw up your hands and you give up.
Absolutely, I agree. I completely agree with that. You know, I mean, in the governor's proposed some things. We've added some things. A lot of what the governor's proposed on pensioner reform this time are things that I have either offered and had votes on, I've offered and filed. So virtually everything in his plan, we have in what we offered this year. We offered it as piecemeal, because sometimes it's too big, so we'll do pieces of it, and we've added some other things. And they're tough things. You know, the reality is they affect me too. You know, a couple of pension reforms, I mean, the Boston Globe called up and said, you know, you realize that if you did this now, under the existing law versus this, you just cost yourself like $500,000. I said, I realize that, but it's the right thing to do. They did the analysis, not me. Right. I said, but it's the right thing to do. You know, so.
Deanna?
Fred, we've been through this before as far as...
Is everybody warm enough? Because
yes.
Thank you.
You guys are on the cool side. We're on the incinerate side here.
What concerns me is the governor makes a presentation, and it looks like he's more supportive of making reforms for healthcare. And it seems like other people will also be in support. However, we all know how this works, because we've been through it before. It gets all the way to the conference committee, and nothing actually happens. What do we as parents, as citizens, as taxpayers do today or every day to make sure that it doesn't get to conference committee again with all of our hopes riding on it, and it doesn't happen? How do we make sure it happens? How do we absolutely
well, I
make sure
mean,
it
first of all,
happens?
I think a couple of things. I think on one level, the dialogue still has to continue on at the local level between, you know, and when I say the local level, but maybe it's sort of the, you know, MMA on let's say on one side, and, you know, call it labor on the other side, about can there be some resolution reached that benefits everybody. You know, there are concerns, and I'm not unsympathetic to the concerns, you know, that if you're a young employee who doesn't necessarily go to the doctors or have a lot of issues, having your copayment go up may not be that big a deal. But if you're a retiree who's having to go frequently, that change can maybe mean a lot of money to you. And is there something that can be developed and put in place that addresses that with some portion of the savings or this and that? Different towns, some towns have reached this and done that. So I think that dialogue still has to go on. One of the things that we were led to believe last time is that, and one of the reasons why it wasn't necessarily pushed on the floor is because both sides were still working towards some resolution. They felt like they were close. And then, so it was like, okay, give everybody a chance. But there comes a time where we have to kind of, take action. Because then we run up against the calendar, and then it's like, oh, well, maybe next time. But the ability to keep saying it's next year or 2 years or 5 years from now is really going out the window pretty quickly. I'd like to think we're done with snowstorms, but I've lived around here too long. I mean, it's crazy because what drives me crazy is that these guys are probably going to be sitting on this side of the table in 4 months declaring, water ban. So don't water your lawn and keep it green. Right now, everybody's got a white lawn. And it's like it boggles your mind, and that'll be after we get through, Mother's Day showers and flooding and it's gone. But you can count on the weather. But it's just a huge challenge. And I would say, and in terms of legislature, I think people need to. I think a lot of the groups, and one of the things that's tough is, you take Suburban Coalition, Stand for Children, MMA, North Shore. I think it's trying to have some target, instead of saying, here's our top 50 items. And every group has the same 50, but in a different order of prioritization, is to try to say, how can we come together? What do we think are the 1 or 2 or 3 most important things for this legislative session that we can or have to achieve? And focus on those. And there may be other things that are important, but it's like, look, you know what? Again, to make the family analogy, I got a lot of house projects that I would like to do. I have my list, my wife has her list. Sometimes they line up, sometimes they don't. The reality is they're never gonna get done in a weekend. So let's pick what do we, as a family, what do we do as a state? What can we do to get the most bang for the most buck? What's the things, what do we agree on? And what can we do? And I would work in all those different groups. Suburban Coalition's a little different. The healthcare is sort of a universal one that affects. The formula one is tough because in order to address the formula, you almost have to address the formula when you have additional resources. But to address the formula when you have basically an even amount or diminished resources basically means, well, we don't like the formula, so take some money from Reading and give it to North Reading, or take some money from Boston and give it to North Reading, or take money from North Reading and give it to somebody else who feels like they're worse off. I've sat here. We had one year where Chapter 70 North Reading went up tremendously one year. And then there was another year where we didn't go up and somebody else went up, and everybody, the year North Reading was up, everybody was, oh, this is a good formula. A year later, like, this formula stinks. And, I get like what Bob said, at the end of the bottom line is, put it whatever account. I think one of the things that helped for me to hear is, I was at a meeting earlier before this meeting this morning where somebody said the most important thing was probably money in circuit breaker. In terms of additional aid, not necessarily in terms of other things, but was in special ed circuit breaker. And I would like to get some data from maybe Bob, or actually maybe Carl. How much money has North Reading gotten? Because one of the things I think, and I will give the governor credit, as much as it occasionally pains me, I think putting $80 million in circuit breaker is probably one of the better places you could put money in. And it's a protection, because obviously you can have a person get an evaluation that's expensive, or somebody move in district, and all of a sudden your numbers are just thrown way off. So it's like a good insurance program to have there. And I know that the $80 million is a pretty big jump up, and that would be something that I think should be a focus on trying to hold on to.
I'll send you an analysis of what the
what you guys have gotten in this and that, and maybe what that breaks down in terms of what you could have gotten. But I know I think at one point we got up to like 71%, and I think then we backslid, and I think this gets us back up.
Yes.
Maybe not fully, but that would be helpful to me.